Thieme and Thom McCabe, who are getting together this morning to discuss Richard's novel, Mobius, a Memoir, and the various threads that it triggers in their ongoing conversation with one another. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Thom McCabe. He's a mathematician, he's an entrepreneur, he's an author, and once upon a time he was associated with the National Security Agency. He founded McCabe Software, and he grew it up to 175 people with European subsidiaries. He's authored 4 books. He's highly published in computer science and highly regarded, I should say. He lectures extensively, and his software program is recognized as one of the 10 most important software programs ever invented. So he's quite a guy. He writes poetry. He's connected to the American Visionary Art Museum. He writes essays, and we have never failed to have a wonderful conversation. He also understood Mobius from the first word to the last, and understood exactly where I was going. Wrote the most beautiful, precise, and well-crafted statement for a review, which is online at Amazon. And so with that, I introduce Thom McCabe. And Thom,
good morning.
Good morning to you, and you can take it from there.
Well, thank you for that inflated introduction. I'll try to live up to at least a piece of it.
It's all true. All true.
And let me start out asking you, the more impressive participant here, about your book. Tell me how it got started.
How Mobius got started?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it got started, I guess, with moth to flame-like attraction to security and intelligence work. I found it fascinating, but it really started at the first DEF CON at which I spoke in 1996, DEF CON 4, and I'm going back this year for the 25th year to speak again. And number one, I went there because I thought hackers were the face of the future, and they were. And some of the young people there became thought leaders and entrepreneurs and masters of the new discipline and the digital world. My intuition was correct. And I also saw that in the national security state we had been building since 1947, in effect, after World War II, when the OSS morphed into other forms and wound up kind of like the CIA. And once we began authorizing covert action as a phrase in the bill that put the CIA into action, we have been building a national security state based on mutual attempts to do intelligence and covert action against one another, all of us, all over the world. And so just as the hackers that I visited in 96 taught me what the frame or shape of the world they were building was going to be, and therefore how human beings would be influenced and find themselves unconsciously behaving in response to the new shapes of their relationships, their thinking about themselves, including identity, all the way up to geopolitical structures. That's where it started. And I met at that first con people from CIA and NSA, and some of them became the closest friends I've ever had in my life. And so I became interested in that and engaged in many conversations with people inside about various things. We never violated classification. I will sign that document right now. We never discussed classified material so far as I knew, nor did I handle any, but I did gain an insight into how things worked. And that was crystallized for me when a dear friend from NSA said one morning, yeah, you're starting to understand how we think. And it's not how normal people think. So that's been 25, 26, 27 years now of immersion in that world. And as you know, I was a clergyman and brought that sensibility and empathy and caring and confidentiality to many of those conversations. which revealed a great deal to me, but I didn't say anything about it until the moment of realization that I wanted to write it in a narrative that included everything. It was
You
just became
know,
compelling.
for anybody that's listening to this that's not read the book, let me tell you why I couldn't put it down. I started reading the book and stayed right with it. Usually when I read a book, a lot of books I don't finish. So I either look for a compelling message or I look for a style of writing. And if I'm looking for style, and it's about style, and some books are, it's the expression, the style, the empathy. I'll read until I get the style, and then the rest of the book really, for me, isn't worth it. Other books are a narrative where it's the story. Your book has both. I found that almost every paragraph had some real meaning,
Hmm.
and it flowed.
Hmm.
And I think your style, if you will,
Hmm.
is that you're so multidimensional in your experience, you bring it all in. And the different paragraphs and different subjects and different scenes combine all that. And for that, usually if you read a book, a Tom Clancy book about the CIA, you get his style with a made up story. And he's an author. In the case of Richard Thieme, you get the empathy of somebody who's been a minister. You get the insight for somebody that's been deep inside the CIA and NSA. You get insights from somebody that's lived in the hacker world. You get insights from somebody that understands ancient culture and is trying to probe like the rest of us and fathom what our future is. So that kind of held me paragraph by paragraph.
Well, that's that's great of you
One of
to
the
say.
yeah, one of the things I just wanted to add to that is that the book itself is almost unsettling because Mobius, the character, is unsettled in the deepest degree. That is, his own identity is fungible, is not clear. And so therefore the book needed to be rooted in something. And the root I feel that you used were the scenes. Every scene was described in a texture, in a way that gave it a sense of place and theme and color and feeling. So I don't know if Richard, you were aware of that, but
Well,
as an experiment, I just opened the book and picked a paragraph. And I've opened the book to page 66. And this is a rather mundane paragraph, the first full paragraph. It's about a parking lot. So it reads, the parking lot was thick with the smoke of brats and burgers on the grills, the smell of beer, the taste of autumn, and the dry falling leaves. The sunlight diffused through the smoke, which hung in the windless air. And it went on. So you have a way of making a parking lot sound poetic.
well, let me try to address that without confirming all your kind and generous words. That's why I loved your response because you got it. You got it. And let me address a couple of the things you said. Mobius is unsettled because I am unsettled. Somebody at CIA once said to me, because I did, I've keynoted security conferences in like 15 countries. I've been all over the world for 25 years and have wonderful, wonderful, beloved colleagues and friends in many places. And a friend who works at CIA said, you talk to so many different people that you're just radically conflicted. And that's why you're the most objective person I know. Because everybody else has chosen an identity and affirmed a way of being consistent with that identity. And and I didn't. And I think ministry was good preparation for that because, well, you'd better become aware that you're using a persona of a pastor or minister to present to people and using it on their behalf. You better not confuse yourself for that persona
Right.
because, pastors and priests and so on are magnets for projection. And it's usually either people thinking you're much better than you are or much worse. And you can't believe either one or you're going to get into trouble. You just have to know
Right.
who you are in there, a human being,
Right.
flawed but with value, and use that as best you can. So I learned to do that in different cultures. I served ministry in Milwaukee and Lahaina on Maui and Salt Lake City, Utah, and even rural Utah, North Davis County between Ogden and Salt Lake. And you had better have a clue as to at least how the other people you're talking to, framed by that culture without knowing it most of the time, are going to react. So um, I was, like Mobius, searching for a clarity about an identity, and like Mobius, I wound up affirming the really the core reason I went into the ministry, or one of them, in the first place, which is that the ultimate bottom line core values, based on shared humanity, are premier. They're paramount,
Right.
and that has to be affirmed beyond all the very good reasons we do intelligence and covert action the way
Sure.
we do. Uh, and
Sure.
and I also knew that the people inside often have so rationalized what they do that they don't even think about that. And I recently read
Right.
Helm's memoir, he called it, but what it was a major justification of everything he did and
Yeah.
trying to explain away. And I knew much about what he did that wasn't in the memoir, and he doesn't mention those things. He doesn't mention the horrific things and the consequences of doing them, that he led because he saw it through the lens of patriotism and
Yeah.
deep assimilation into the culture of the intelligence community, and that's what I tried to get in Mobius too.
I
Uh,
think it reminds me of McNamara's book, Justifying the Bombing of,
yeah,
of North Korea. I think that message is more topical than you give it credit for, which means the book has a deeper meaning than what we discussed before. And that is, we are so conflicted now with politics.
yeah,
It's to the point that families are torn apart, and there's no compromise, and there's no reflecting across party lines. And the same is true geopolitically across the globe. And so it's very difficult. It's impossible to get consensus and
right,
agreement. But the one thing that is immutable is the heroic characters within each of those systems, within Russia, within China, within the United States. There are people with incredible values and independent of their political persuasion or national identity have and continue to do great things for humankind.
that's absolutely correct. And
And I, as you know, I mentor entrepreneurs, and I was an entrepreneur myself, and that gave me a certain resonance with the book because entrepreneurs don't know where they're going. There's no playbook.
right,
But included, when I talk about entrepreneurs, included are people like Mother Teresa, who had to put together an organization, grow it, nurture it, to create the incredible gifts and sacrifice and well-being that
right,
came forth from it.
right, that's right,
And you wouldn't compare her with Steve Jobs, but her vision and her compassion and her dedication, I'm sure, was equal to his. So
right.
there are people like that, and there are people that aren't Mother Teresa that have everyday jobs that raise families in heroic ways. And I think they are equally distributed across geopolitical boundaries, across race, across nationality, across any categorization you could think of.
I think you're absolutely right, and you're talking about. I think Mobius said something about the conscience never burns out. It's
Right.
once you've got it, it's an ember that glows within you, and that's what he was in search of. And there's scene where he goes to a law firm in Washington, D.C., which is a law firm in Washington, D.C., in fact, that handles a lot of whistleblowers. And they make the case to him that, boy, you better not start this unless you're doing
Right.
it for one reason, only,
Money.
which is conscience.
Yeah.
And that is their rubric, that if you're blowing the whistle to get revenge because you're angry, to get money, any other lesser motivation, you won't make it.
Wow.
Because I know from observation and experience, what they do to a whistleblower is try to destroy you. They try to destroy your reputation. They don't have to kill you. There's a chapter in there that's based loosely, fictionalized, on Gary Webb and
Yeah.
his escapade. And after he killed himself, people wrote to me because they knew I was connected to him and said, "Don't you think the CIA might have assassinated him?" And I said, "Look, they made sure his career was ruined. He couldn't get a job doing the one thing he loved. He went downhill pretty fast. And finally, when he had nothing left but his father's motorcycle and came out of his cheap motel and found someone had stolen even that, he went back inside and shot himself." And my point was, if you take away someone's motive for living, you don't need to send a hitman to kill them. They'll do the job for you,
Wow.
and they do. And there's plenty of people who, in that whole Gary Webb episode, were involved with cocaine trafficking and arms trafficking with Central America. It was denied, and as Mobius says, if you just wait long enough, there's zero accountability because people forget it and they're never going to go back. And with the pardon power the presidents, all of them have now, whether it was Scooter Libby or Henry Kissinger was never brought up on war criminal charges, and Cheney was never brought up on war criminal charges. But if they had been, they would have been pardoned.
Yeah.
And so that's the world we live in, and you'd better know that because you don't tell the truth unless you have no other choice but to do that.
Right.
And that's really, if you look at my life, it was literature, which I thought was about the truth, and then ministry, which I thought was even a deeper truth, not just cultural, but fundamentally or cosmic or spiritual. And then this other world was bringing all of that into the abrasive reality of working with people who do what they do. And so I have no illusions about my own complicity in the
Right.
enterprise because I worked with them. And someone once said to me, you're just helping these guys bleed off their guilt.
Yeah.
And maybe I was, but I was also bleeding off my own guilt. So
We come from a similar place. My, as you know, I created a company and I wrote a book and I do seminars about consciousness,
right. Tell us
and
about that.
it's related to conscience. And the thing I developed uh, is based on mathematics, and it has a way in consciousness. We start with an intuition or a thought or a liking, and then to make that manifest in our lives, come alive, it forms a sentence that I, Tom, are going to work out more since I had a heart condition.
Hmm.
And then, if you really get into the meaning of the sentence, it has different perspectives. And that's the way in which we connect. You with multiple personalities, me with multiple perspectives. And it turns out to be mathematically the case that, and it's a form of empathy, that every sentence about ourselves or anything you want to talk about has 6 different perspectives. And for example, the sentence has a subject, a process, a verb, an object. Well, there's a perspective, obviously, from the subject. There's also a perspective from the object, and there's a perspective from the process of the verb. And it turns out there are 6 such things. And the way I see us connecting is that my bedrock, the thing I grew up with, is I found everything I studied boring as hell because it wasn't real. And the only thing I believed in was math. And then I eventually get into poetry with math because I felt that was the most crisp truth you could get at.
Right.
But here's the point, I think, that where we intersect, and that is it's Mobius as every man. Because there are different perspectives, and each of us, for lack of a better phrase, wears different hats. You
Right.
wear a hat as a student, as a boss, as an employer, as a father, as a husband, as a family member, as a citizen of the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And most of them are explicit. However, some of them have to be veiled. When I was successful as an entrepreneur, I didn't want to really let out that it was working so well for a bunch of different reasons. When I would go to a competitors and talk about a technology, I would only give them a surface view of what I was doing and try to really fully absorb what they were doing.
Right. Exactly.
When I was working in a country that had a different form of politics, I had to be very careful what I said about their politicians.
Right. And
so here's my question.
You gave people enough to facilitate the conversation so that the bridge was built and more information came back over to you.
Right. So in both of our backgrounds and things we talk about is people, in your case, are challenged. People in your case have to know their identity, have to know their conscience, and are challenged by the norms and conventions of and culture of the workplaces they find themselves in, to the point they get co-opted, and if they're not conscious of that, it becomes in fact the way they think, which is not a great way to think. In my case, I'm describing the everyday life of John Q. Citizen, and that person wears many hats. So how do those two worlds intersect?
Are you asking that question?
Yes.
They intersect the way the layers of an onion intersect, you know. And, you hope that when you get down to the core of the onion, there's nothing there. There's no core. You hope there is a core, and you know, honestly, all of those things I learned to say and interpret in my own brain in a way that made sense from the religious world. Um, when you bring to that our understanding of how we think, all of our cognitive biases, all of our rationalizations, and above all, the seemingly illusory, transitory nature of the self. Uh, and you know, the hallmark of Christianity, the cornerstone, is that there's a permanent self. But all the evidence is that there isn't. Um, I, I, I don't know. Nobody knows what energy and information is left over from the system of energy and information that we are in this current configuration, and we will find out or not. But as a foundation for staking everything on it, it's a bit thin. Um, but you're also pointing to the particular kind of person who goes into the intelligence community. I was talking to someone who's become a friend who I respect deeply for the work that they have done, and it struck me again that, as a friend of mine said, and it's in Mobius, he was looking around NSA, and he said, you know, he says, I haven't done a study, but I think a lot of us came from what we call dysfunctional environments. It's a negative word, but you know what I mean. Not optimal. And he said, you learn what the child of an alcoholic learns three things: don't tell, don't feel, don't trust. And he said that suited us. Those three things suit us perfectly for the work we seem to have self-selected into, but in fact, we had no choice but to adapt as a way of taking those things and making them features rather than bugs. And I once mentioned that. I said that in a conversation I was having with CIA people, and the guy went ballistic. I mean, he just went nuts, which to me was, you're protesting way too much, because bingo, I hit it on the head. He was talking about how wonderful they were and how brilliant they were and how committed and patriotic they were. And all that may be true on top of it, but you better know that there's a foundation beneath it that is all too human. And what you're saying is know yourself. I just put a bunch of videos on my website I think there are about 50 of speeches I've done. And way back, I was interviewed when I first started this work in 1994 on a television program in Milwaukee. And the guy had worked with a lot of politicians, and he said, "What you're saying," he said, "this is fascinating. You're saying what I tell people who want to run for office, which is know yourself.
Yeah,
You better know who you are because they're going to turn who you are inside out.
right.
And you better be ready for that ride." And that's kind of what Mobius learned along the way
The,
too.
the, the,
Let me
the
say one other thing, and then we'll
yeah,
get back to you.
yeah,
Uh, a number of people, surprising to me, have commented on the relationship with Penny. A number of
yes,
people have written emails. Some are in the reviews on Amazon, but some are not. They're private emails about how that rang a bell with them, how that resonated with them. One NSA veteran just wrote, "For 49 years, I've had this relationship to which I
yeah,
continue to return." And others have written that they tried to do what Mobius tried to do, which is tell their Penny. They even said that. I tried to tell my Penny why
yeah,
I couldn't put this book down, and NSA people, and couldn't do it
right,
because they wouldn't understand. They said I would get all tangled up in a Mobius fiction. And
right.
one said he tried, a good friend in the Netherlands who's done this work, and he said, gosh, he tried to tell a couple of stories that would help his Penny understand why he was getting agitated reading the book. And he said,
Dean or Dean Buck?
that must be yours. I don't have that ringtone.
I just stopped it.
Okay. It struck me that there were an awful lot of people who had found the need of an emotional anchor of some kind, to which they could reach out as one of the as Mobius had the only relationship he had that he could
Yeah,
trust and count on, even though everything he had presented to that person for decades was a lie.
right. But isn't also you're leaving out, I think, one of your most important chapters, and and that is she didn't quite get it or
Oh,
didn't
no,
want to get it.
she couldn't.
She
She couldn't.
couldn't get it.
She couldn't grasp the enormity of it, and it was
Right.
a larger version of, as I've given speeches on these dynamics we're discussing, as well as, I've explored the UFO world, which is now suddenly getting the authoritative voice behind it after 50
Right.
years of debunking it. Um, the, uh, uh, the UFO world too is a place I've gone that has been ridiculed and disparaged. And when I was talking about those things and the intelligence community, people in the audience would say literally, "I don't want to hear that."
Right.
Or one wrote an email, an evaluation of a talk I did not long ago, and he said, "I don't want to live in that world. There's aliens behind every tree and spies all over." And I thought, well, there are aliens and there are spies. This is just a fact of the universe, but it's too big for people to grasp the degree to which their construction of reality is a falsified convenience in
Right.
order to get through life, and it's usually reinforced by hanging out with people who will say the same things, believe the same things, use the same code words to support that falsified, convenient construction of reality, in order to manage cognitive dissonance and anxiety, or
Yeah.
even depression.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that and get that. But haven't you left something out,
What's that?
left something out about Penny? And that is, yes, she couldn't get it. I got that. But you were saying before that people survive by having a penny in their life, and that is it's kind of a root. They've been there for some time. They're comfortable in the unknowing. And then when the knowing is presented, they don't get it. And
Right,
that was effectively the end of the relationship.
right.
And it was her that initiated the breakup because Mobius was content, I think, with continuing. But I think that's kind of like it strikes me from my perspective of many hats, that some of us that are really blessed with a certain knowledge can't share it because the audience or the friends or the surrounding or whoever they're with Both doesn't get it and doesn't want to get it.
That's right. And and it becomes a kind of confinement that you have to learn how to pace off the number of feet in that cell,
Right.
and consider it exercise. When I did a talk called "Playing Through the Pain" at DEF CON, uh, I realized after 25 years, I've been listening to stories, the impact of the work of both security and intelligence work, InfoSec, on people who did it, and it was never addressed in these wonderful conferences where the sponsors are people who sell products, and
Yeah.
they don't want that uh,
Right.
addressed. So I wrote to a lot of colleagues I had made along the way and said, "Would you like to share stories about that so I can flesh out my talk with real anecdotes?" Over 50 people, CIA, NSA, corporate, and military, sent stories,
Yeah.
powerful,
Wow.
poignant stories of the impact of the work on them. And when a reporter, really good reporter, uh, watched that video, they talked to me, and I think it was because they wanted a connection with someone who understood. And what they wanted me to understand was they had, I think they said, 4 instances where their sources at CIA had told them something that pulled the cornerstone out from under their life, as I had
Wow.
described in that talk had happened to me. And you realize, God, if that was true, but I believe the opposite, what can I believe? And the reporter described it as like living underwater for weeks. And the surprising thing was, this person is surrounded by sophisticated political people. No one understood, they said. I tried to tell them not the details because we don't, but what it was like to live like that, to
Yeah.
feel totally uh, disassociated from the consensus reality you had believed and others continue to believe. And they said nobody understood it. And that is the condition, whether it's PTSD. All these people I've known came back from Vietnam, that forget Afghanistan and Iraq, uh, horrific stories uh,
Yeah.
that are just, shoveled into the river, and the river carries
Yeah.
the dead cows and chicken coops to the sea, and they all sink in the sea. And until
Yeah.
the sea becomes toxic, we don't realize what we've dumped as our
Yeah.
collective garbage into the
Right.
waters of life that
Right.
once upon a time were sparkling and pristine, right?
Right.
So,
I experienced something like that. It's not nearly as dramatic, but life as an entrepreneur is unlearning things. You
tell me
first
about
have
that. What do you mean?
well, what I mean is, one of the first lessons you have to unlearn is that your father's notion of you becoming either a teacher or a mailman doesn't make any sense,
Right.
because we grew up in a place where there were no jobs, and during the Depression, teachers taught a mailman to live in mail. They had a job.
Right. Understood.
So, but it takes you years to get rid of the the feeling, the instinct, the fear. Another thing you learn is that when you have a job and you work within an organization, if you go to anybody that works there and say, "I'm thinking about going out for my own business," they'll tell you you're crazy. What
Hmm.
about your retirement? What about your pension, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera?
Faced that when I left the ministry at the age of 49.
Right. So you have to jump the culture, and then you may reject what they say, but it's been ingrained into your thought pattern. So it takes years to unlearn it. And unlearning isn't quite to expunge it, let's say.
Right.
And then there's more things to unlearn. Then you unlearn when you have a small business. This is a good one. You first learn that accountants and lawyers are useless, because they'll each tell you how to run a business, and they've never created one. And then they'll tell you you run a business either for growth or for profit, right? So that's something they read in an MBA book. Turns
Right.
out that's not true at all. So you go through this thing where you take the environment you've been in and the lessons, so-called lessons taught, and you have to reject them. You first have to figure out the opposite is true. But that doesn't, when you clear your intellect, it doesn't clear your gut. And so, and it takes years to expunge that. Now, that's not as dramatic as the kind of things you're talking about, but it's an unfolding, and it's incredible. You're learning things at 40 years old that if you just had a wise person young in your life, they could have told you this.
Right, right. But you wouldn't have understood until you learned it viscerally through,
That might
through
be.
your own experience. And you're pointing to another aspect of Mobius that I found interesting. Um, people like to value their contributions to the language by counting how many words they coined. And I've got one that worked and one that's on its way. The one that worked was humpling, which I hear
Yes.
people using.
Yeah,
Um, it's in the language. Somebody posted my favorite word, humpling.
that's great.
Uh,
Yeah.
the other one is mega pounder, which my children severely and harshly criticize as
Yeah.
an inappropriate word. Um, but we are
What was it?
surrounded by
Was it,
massive obesity
you
and
say mega pounding?
mega pounder, a mega
Mega,
pounder.
gotcha.
Um, I blurted it out when I was trying to get up the walk to a medical clinic, and I couldn't get past the person who could barely walk, who weighed 500 pounds, and I thought they want to go in and have
Yeah.
their knee replaced, or whatever. But I had an orthopedic surgeon say to me, "God, people come into the office," and I say, "For heaven's sakes, lose 100 pounds."
Yeah.
But at any rate, that's a little mini rant. The humpling is more important because one of the things people have criticized, not really criticized, but singled out in Mobius is, boy, he's an arrogant son of a bitch,
Yeah.
especially in his youth. I mean, there's a chapter in
Yeah.
there about his contempt for the humpling environment in a southern Indiana city, which I don't even have to name because there's only one. Uh, and and that story he told, which I had in a short story in a different form once upon a time, the geometry of near, being surrounded by people who are myopic
Yeah.
when you see
Yeah.
far, and that's
Yeah.
and as a young
By the way,
arrogant
you want to coin that phrase. That phrase just stuck to my ribs. The
what's that?
geometry of near,
Oh yeah, that's the title
and
of
how like
the
the
story.
truth is beyond.
It's the
And
title of the story, and
and
it's
there's a
McCabe.
constraint, and there's a constraint, and it's the things I was talking about, a mailman or a teacher.
Yep.
And it's like if the next door, their perspective went as far as the next block away, and that was it.
Right. So the point I'm trying to kind of articulate, which is a little embarrassing because it's not flattering of myself, is that believing, especially growing up as a minority, as I did, and living as a minority in so many different ways. I do a talk on that, the difference it makes being different, uh, requires you to elaborate a defense mechanism, which is, well, we're superior to that. We're superior to you. As a way to compensate for the fact that people are telling you in a million ways you're inferior.
Yeah.
Through disrespect, a lack of mentoring, a lack of support, etc., which minorities all know about because it's their life. And we're
Right.
currently going through that extreme paroxysm of consciousness as a society, because a lot of people don't want to know what it's
Right.
like to live as a minority. But one of the reasons he could say, there's masters and there's humplings and there's dregs, is because he obviously thinks he ties into the masters a little more, at least in point of view, and certainly in his chosen work, uh,
Right.
than the humplings who just quietly accept consensus reality as it's given to them. I think worse, more than ever, through television programs and social media, as a way to frame reality, which is so
Right.
woefully inadequate, because it teaches you that the unexamined life is the only one to lead,
Right.
rather
Right.
than that it's not worth living. Uh,
Right.
so you have to come up with a way of uh, just charging forward in your own life and referencing your own values as you discover them. And
Right.
that's why perhaps your life and my life align in that we chose very non-standard trajectories
Yeah.
through
I
life.
think, I think, I think there's another dimension to that. I think that in each of our lives, and is we transcended that. And I think some of our success and experience is because of that. See,
Right.
I think if Richard Thiem was in an environment and it was cosmopolitan and they knew you were going to be an author and you knew you'd be really good at insights about geopolitics and hacking, they would have given you the books and sent you to a school to become that. And you
Right.
would have become that.
Right.
But without the passion, without the commitment, without the insight of the present Richard Thiem, who had to transcend the very things we're talking about.
Right. Right. And that does go back to your childhood. I didn't have a father. I had a mother who I won't even get into, but I had an aunt and uncle who let me take refuge in their southern Indiana home in the summers for a few years until I couldn't stand being down there instead of roaming the streets of Chicago. And when I start writing stories as a teenager, as a probably compensatory mechanism, literature, it's where I lost myself or found myself, both.
Yeah.
And I published my first short story about virtual reality, a machine for it, when I was a teenager in analog science fiction. And the excoriating comments I got from that family were, oh, he wrote a story about a typewriter that married an adding machine. And then they would laugh with this deep, deep, unconscious ignorance of why what they were saying was so damn dumb. But as a
Yeah.
teenager with arrogance, I also had to say, no, the one thing that I do well, I've got to find a way to value that.
Yes.
And they wanted me to get a degree in accounting and then go on to law school. Honestly, as you say, mailman, uh, for that family, no, you want to be a CPA, you
Yeah.
want to work with numbers, you want to,
Yeah.
take a tried and true route. And I had a good friend who did take that route. He wound up a partner at a major firm and succeeded and never looked back. Well, I never looked back either, but my response to that was never, never.
Yeah.
And I guess the symptom of that is people say, "Oh, do you play golf? Do you want to play?" I said, "No, I do not play golf because that's
Right.
all. It's in the story. All he did
Right.
was play golf, read about golf, watch golf, uh,
Right.
and then he was going to give a lecture at the library uh, about golf, and found out that people preferred their digital friends on
Right.
television to listening to someone they knew all their lives. So yeah, you. But here's the redeeming part of that for me. When I was at seminary, there were a lot of great professors that mentored me. Thank God, father figures who really lived up to the name. And one of them, Paul Ellman, had taught literature, and he said to me, just kind of aside, the way most of these statements come to our lives. He said, people like you, people like me, um, without the gospel, we would have been dead.
Wow.
And what he meant is I uh, had to give wholehearted, unalleviating commitment to a way of living life that had a foundation that really, in a nutshell, meant that I didn't belong to myself. I belonged to the world. And everything that I could find that I could do that might have value, my obligation was to do that and
Yeah.
to get better at it.
Right.
And to do it as well as I could, so that, as George Bernard Shaw said in that wonderful quote, life is not a flickering candle; it's a bright shining torch that I've got a hold of for only a short little while, and I want it to burn as brightly as I can, not with expectation that you have an extraordinary impact
Right.
on people, but that you have the impact you could have if you
Yes.
gave it everything you could do, knowing
Right.
how little it is, right?
Right.
Um, so that came out of the interior somehow, and that was my compass. That was
Yeah.
the light by which I navigated, the lamp unto my feet, so to speak, by which I navigated these twisty passageways that took me into, as this new friend in security said the other day, said, "Why do we keep touching the third rail?" And it's because we like the way it feels when
Yeah.
that electricity lights you up,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Uh,
So, Richard, I got a question about the book. I think the book is terrific. I couldn't put it down. I thought it was complete in the narrative. What do you feel like you've left out of it?
I have begun thinking about what I was going to write next, and the book I thought I was going to write next, I couldn't find the right voice. I don't know that I ever will, so I just put it aside. I may never get back to it. But what is coming to me is a follow-up. What is coming to me is what it is like for Nick after afterward, and
Yeah,
a whole variety of scenarios pop up, as well as his relationship to Penny, and even though she doesn't live that long, Penny does, in the way I am thinking about it, and
yeah,
he has to deal with his relationship to someone who couldn't speak uh, back to him, but now
right.
not by choice, but by forever. And what is it? So, so what I have left out is, well, how do you live after that? How do you
Right,
live when your friends are whistleblowers and people with a passionate commitment to justice? And what
right,
do you find out about the ambiguity of their motivation and their commitments? And how do you navigate that? And what kind of conundrums do they create for themselves the same way some of those people did in Mobius?
right.
So, so I'm thinking of those aspects of it. The other thing that I left out, which is that book I don't know that I'll ever write, and which is huge, is that I was in the ministry one way or another for 20 years, formally, that is.
Yeah,
Um, and I learned how it works. I learned how it really works. And I also learned how the institutional and cultural life worked. Now, that was the Episcopal Church. It wasn't the Catholic Church, which has, uh, you know, a despicable track record of commitment to the truths it articulates,
right,
as shown most grievously in the pedophile cover-up scandal, which continues to this day.
right.
Um, to even suggest that, oh, we're going to have a serious penalty, you're going to have to resign the priesthood. No, you're going to jail.
Yeah,
No, they never say that. They,
right,
but at any rate, I knew, I knew what it was like inside, what mixed motivations brought people into the ministry. I counseled lots of clergy,
right,
listened to them closely. I listened to myself closely. I don't know if I can write that book
right,
because of the nature of what I know.
right.
Uh, so that's even beyond. So that shows that, in a way, Mobius is an evasion rather
Let
than
me
a forthright confessional book that it seems to be.
let me take a huge risk here and suggest your next book. And by analogy, I'm a little bit older than you, but I now mentor entrepreneurs.
Right.
So there's a place at the University of Maryland where they have an incubator with 50 cybersecurity companies, and I mentor them about risk management and growth and some of the mathematics, but how you deal with things as an entrepreneur. It seems to me an analogous thing for you would be the teaching moments and lessons from Mobius. That is the after effect, the aftermath. How do you live? How do you live when he's out of the environment
Right.
and when his memories become his main fruit of the day? How
Right.
does he live with, what does the relationship with Penny mean? Would he want to reconstitute it if she were still there? What does he do? How does he, can he go back in and help people going through this?
Right.
Can he talk to the management at each of these places? And can you share the wisdom and how much of that would they want to have you impart to their employees that are carrying these things out? And beyond all of that, just as a person having gone through all that, what's left?
Right.
What do you do?
Right.
What do you remember? What would you want to pass on? What do you regret?
Boy.
You know, would you have been better off have been a humbling and taking that job delivering mail?
No way. No way.
Well, I know that,
No.
but
No,
it's still a good discourse.
what a
Yeah, that was
nightmare,
clear.
right?
I get that.
Worrying about my slice on the golf course. No, no, uh, no. And you're bringing up, this is an autobiographical thing. The first person we really fall in love with has an indelible place on us. And for me, it was a girl I met in high school, and we were crazy about each other, and we knew intuitively that we didn't belong together for life, and we just figured that out.
Yeah,
But about every 10 years, we'd touch base, and that was it. That was like Penny. We weren't lovers anymore.
yeah,
But what happened to her, what happened to me mattered. And 40, 50 years later, we talked for the last time, and we acknowledged that we had meant so much to each other 50 years earlier. Um, and the next thing I knew, I got an email from her daughter saying my mother has died of leukemia. Okay,
boy.
so we didn't get a final meeting after that, and I went down to Chicago to a celebration of her life, and she had a great life, and it was a great celebration. And her husband was just a terrific guy, and he said, "I have something I'm going to send you. I can't find it now, but I'll." That week, I hear a thump on the doorstep and go, and I find a big box, and it contains every letter I ever wrote to her,
Wow.
which she had saved. Um, so I went through them, and a couple of things interested me. One was long-term memories that I had not had for half a century. I thought were
Yeah,
buried, gone. The synapses were done. No,
yeah,
it flooded my brain, vivid, luminous, and powerful memories of all those specific things we did and times we spent together 50
right.
years early. And for a week or two, my heroic wife said, "Well, I can't compete with a ghost. So you'll just get through this." And I did. And I read through them and I thought about it for a while and then I got rid of them. And you move on with life. But that remains as a template for one of
Sure.
the ways I could approach his relationship with a ghost,
Yes.
which is what he's going to have. And that fits um, very much what you said. And there is a scene in Mobius that derives from that time, all those years before. And that's, you can figure it out. They're having dinner, and then their
Yeah.
kids are in the kitchen washing up, and that scene. Yeah, well, that was that person 50 years ago.
I think, and by the way, I finally figured out how we connected so well because your theme is so compelling and your Richard theme. So it finally dawned on me.
That is true. Now
So let me back to the point about post Mobius. Um, I think a book about that, about what he does with this experience. And I think the story you told is a perfect analogy because there was a real relationship. It kind of flickered and stayed alive. And then there was a capstone to it.
right.
And I think likewise with life, like you bring up the issue, the core issue, that to get through any of these things or to survive, you have to know your core conscience. You have to find that. That's the bedrock.
Right.
Now, there's another corresponding theory that doesn't contradict it, but I think it supplements it. And that is that we are the sum integration of all our experiences.
Yes.
And one theory has it that just before we die, and this is controversial, but some people believe this, that psychologically life replays itself.
Hmm.
And it makes sense.
Hmm.
Whereas in many cases before then, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
They just seem unrelated and disconnected.
Absolutely. And
Well, I
I've been
think, I
told that
think,
that's happened.
I, I think Mobius too should be that story.
Well, that's a great suggestion, and I
Right.
agree with you. That's actually happened. I suddenly found, as I age more and more, I am able to see, well, no wonder I did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It all makes sense, and it goes back to the death of my father when I was 2 years old, how my mother coped or didn't cope with that, and
Right.
everything that followed. Um,
Same
it
in
all
my case.
it all links. Let me ask you one other question before we have to end this. Love talking to you as always, Thom. You are honored and acknowledged for software that you created. And I
Right.
just want to get on the record. People can learn more about you by going to expanded-consciousness.com, where they'll
Yes.
find information about you. But I wanted you to just say what that software was that you created that was really,
Well,
really important.
yeah, it was a software metric that would measure how difficult it was to understand an algorithm,
Hmm.
and then how to test an algorithm. And if you do a Google search on McCabe complexity, you'll see it come up. There's millions of people that now use it. And it was a combination of my mathematical background and computer science.
Right.
And by the way, I have another theory I'll throw in this just at the end.
We can't stop.
When we do this integration of our lives, the things that we integrate, like in my case at that time, it was math and computer science. So that has a certain distance. It isn't the biggest distance, but it's the distance. The power of new ideas is proportionate to the distance between life's events.
Okay.
So when they harmonize, when they integrate, the larger whole is proportionate to how distant they are. Now, for example, I was an athlete and I still am, and I write poetry. I write poetry and I do math. So they seem distant worlds apart. They're not at all. Mathematics is considered elegant when when you minimize the assumptions and you minimize the number of statements to prove something,
Got it.
right?
Got it.
Poetry, likewise, is poetic, is pure, as it's short, as it's concise, as it's canonical.
Right.
And writing in both realms is very similar.
Right.
Another person once said, mathematics is the poetry of the mind, and poetry is the mathematics of the heart.
Yep. Yep.
So my point, Richard, is Mobius too, as you bring together these threads that seem unrelated, all the more powerful it will be.
Well, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. And I'm thinking, as you say that, there's a friend I have here in Minneapolis named Ben Shank, who has a very good company teaching writing to businesses and the like. But he writes poetry, and to my shock, it was terrific poetry. It was a sensibility that crafted things with brevity, precision, and irony in a way that I hadn't seen for a long time. Maybe I just don't read a lot of poetry. Poetry is out of fashion. When I was growing up, everybody knew who Robert Frost was. Everybody knew who T.S. Eliot was. Poets were big persons, and they were on the Tonight Show.
Yeah.
You know, not anymore. It's a niche. But reading Ben's poetry, I thought there are probably other unsung poets who are exercising their craft with that kind of judicious clarity. Um, and that's who I'm thinking of, because he shared some of his poems with me, and I was just blown away at how terrific he brought his sensibility to that work.
I
But
think the very last page of Mobius too should be a poem.
I found it interesting. You know, Jennifer Granick in other discussions in this book has said that she really relished all the popular culture references, and
Yeah.
because he's feigning being a literature professor or teacher, instructor, there are a lot of them from literature, and the book seems to end with a direct quote from Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. So we beat our boats against the current, drawn back ceaselessly to the past. But there was no way I was really going to end the book by quoting someone else. And I have to admit to you that I have read that last paragraph um, and the few short ones before it a number of times. And I always say to myself, where did that come from? Where did that come from, other than from the deepest truth I could articulate in my own words, in Mobius's own words, as the appropriate coda to everything that had come before. So I appreciate your saying that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep talking, but not
Okay.
on Zoom. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. It's always
Well, I really
fun to
enjoyed it. And I
Uh,
love your book. And I'm looking forward to Mobius too.
yeah, yeah. Let's hope we can sell some of those books. Take
Thank you,
care.
Richard.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Bye
take
bye.
care. Bye-bye.